Well, we are in a series we're calling How to Get Life Right. This is part 2. And listen, if you feel like today's your first day and you feel like you walked into the movie and you thought it was still the previews, but it already started, have no fear. You can go to tcat.church/life. You can watch the message from last week. Spoiler alert, it was kind of a hard one. We talked about marriage, and y'all stuck in there with me. We had some really hard conversations, and then some of y'all had some hard conversations after. But really, the point of doing that is not that I want to be a torturer, but it's that we said this, that life is complicated, right? And you don't need, this is not why you pay me, okay? Everybody can figure this out on your own. Life is complicated. The thing is, though, you want to get it right. You want to get it right, and we want to help. We feel like we want to position ourselves as a place in your life where you can find help, where you can find guidance, and we feel like Jesus is the answer to some of those things, and we want to help you figure out how that works in your life. And so I challenged all of you throughout the 4 weeks of this series to ask yourself this question each week. Am I trying to get it right? Really? Am I trying to get it right? Really? Right? Am I being intentional in these 4 areas of my life? And these are not the only 4 things you want to get right, but what we decided was if you don't get these 4 things right, it's really hard for you to have a satisfying life. And so, again, we talked about marriage last week, and we asked, am I trying to get marriage right? Really? Am I trying to get my relationship right? Really? Today we're going to talk about money, and I want to start with the same kind of question, but I want to ask it in just a little bit different way to get the ball rolling. Don't raise your hand for this, right? But have you ever done anything with your money that you wish you hadn't? I like the chuckles that I heard. I heard a few chuckles like, yeah, duh. Yeah. Have you ever done anything with your money that you wish you hadn't? Right? And when I was a kid, I'm going to tell you a couple stories. I could tell you more close ones, but this one doesn't seem as embarrassing to me for some reason. But when I was a kid, I used to get those magazines, the back of our comic books, it would have those advertisements for things, like you could buy a time machine, or you could, you could buy, a working axe, or a working helicopter was my favorite, and I actually sent off, because it was like $9.99. You can get this. I thought I was buying an actual helicopter, but what actually showed up was the plans to build a helicopter that is not really relevant for an 8-year-old. Just to be completely honest. And I wish I hadn't wasted my money on that. Even though my mom and dad said, hey, you're not going to be happy with that, I had completely wasted my money. Have you ever done anything, maybe a little bit more serious, with your money that you wish you hadn't? The truth is, all of us have. And problematically, the older we get, the more complicated that gets. Because then all of a sudden it's debt, right? Then all of a sudden it's, oh my gosh, it's going to take me 10 years to pay this off. Not like it was a whim and it was my birthday and we ran down and we were just looking at the truck, but now I have a truck and I didn't have the money for said truck, so now I got to pay for the truck and they're going to get money and interest. See what I'm saying? Like sometimes it seems like a really simple decision, but then you get done with it and you're like, oh no, what have I done? I don't think there's any more complicated area for us than that, than in money. Because conversely, here's something that I was never taught when I was a kid, okay? And this might not be a way you've ever heard church people talk about money before, but let's just own this, and it's the truth, okay? Money can add meaning to your life. It really can. Money can add meaning to your life, but it's not the meaning of life. And maybe this was just a temptation that I was mostly susceptible to, but like the thing that I thought when I was in high school, I'm going to go, I'm going to get my college degree, I'm going to get a huge, great paying job, I'm going to make lots of money, and my life is going to be fantastic. As soon as I'm making that money, everything will be fine. That's not how life turned out, obviously, because here I am. But more than that, that's not really, we all think this, but that's not actually true. This is what's actually the reality. Money can add meaning to your life, but it's not the meaning of life. Now, I'm going to tell you something. This is kind of a tongue twister, okay? But what I'm about to read to you is the point of what I'm going to try to get across in the rest of our time together today. So think about this. I'll leave it on the screen for a few minutes, and then the more time you spend on this, the more sense this is going to make. Okay, you ready? Here we go. This is important. Being a means to an end is what makes anything meaningful. Now think about this for a second. Being a means to an end is what makes anything meaningful. The thing itself, right? The thing itself is not necessarily the thing you're actually looking for, but getting you to some place or getting you to some place to go, that's why it's meaningful. For example, on my bookshelf are a handful of books that I've actually never read. Right? I've never read them before. In fact, one of them's titled, I Wish I Could Give My Son a Wild Raccoon. That is the name of the book. Now, why would I have a book on my shelf titled that? Well, it just so happens that inside the pages of that are notes that were handwritten by my grandfather. Handwritten by my grandfather when he was studying or reading that book or whatever, and I like remembering his handwriting. Now, the book means nothing to me. but the memories of my grandfather that it brings up are meaningful to me. Do you see what I'm saying? So look, being a means to an end is what makes anything meaningful. And so if something creates a pathway to get you where you want to go, that's why it's really meaningful. And this is really helpful when you think about your money. Because if we make money the end, right, oftentimes when you make money the end, you end up alone. When you make money the end, you end up where you don't want to be. But when you put money in its proper place, and when you think about like the actual priorities that it can create and the opportunities it creates, well, then it becomes a means to an end that creates meaning. Now, spoiler, Jesus thought about money this exact same way. So nothing that I'm about to say, nothing I've said so far is original to me, okay? So no royalties, don't go, oh, you're so smart. Jesus said all of this, okay? This is not me, this is him. And interestingly enough, Jesus talked a lot about money. Now, it's so uncomfortable for us to do, because I don't know you and you don't know me, and you're like, well, he could stink at his money. Ask my wife, she can tell you tons of stories. I probably do, okay? But Jesus doesn't. And in fact, the interesting thing, Jesus actually talked more about money than he did about heaven. Did you know that? There's about, depending on how you count them, there's 35 or 38 parables that Jesus gave in the New Testament. 16 of them concern money. Now, why would he do that? Well, this may come off offensive and I don't mean it to, but it's because we have such a propensity to mess it up. As humans, not just like you or just people living in Tuscaloosa, we as individuals have such a propensity to mess this up. And Jesus told what I think is one of the most confusing parables, and the first time I read it, I got all the wrong implications reading it, and we're going to share it with you today, and maybe you're going to get the wrong ones too, I don't know, but I'm going to try to walk you through it, because Jesus gives such a clear picture of what could happen when we put money in its proper place. Now, one more thing, and then I'm going to get into the story, okay, because this is good stuff. Nothing I'm about to say is meant to guilt you, okay? So if it comes off that way, you got to draw your own conclusions. That is not my intent. In fact, nothing I said last week was meant to guilt you or point a finger at you. And we all get this right or wrong all the time. What I'm hoping to do is what Jesus hoped to do, which is give you a window into the way God looks at things as an opportunity for you to make some different choices going forward. That's really all my goal. I laid my agenda on the table, okay? So here we go. Let's dig into this kind of crazy story that Jesus told. Now, this story that I'm going to give to you today is found in the Gospel of Luke. Matthew, Mark, Luke, third book of the New Testament. If you've been following along with me this year, I spent quite a bit of time in the Gospel of Luke earlier this year. Luke was a first century doctor. He was also a follower of Jesus. He was one who investigated carefully all sorts of things concerning Jesus' life, and after the resurrection started writing all this stuff down because he knew how important it was. And so Luke records this little story that Jesus actually tells his disciples. Now, this is not a story of something that happened. This is Jesus this is kind of like he looks at his disciples and said, once upon a time, and then gives a parable to them. But this is how Jesus begins, looking at his disciples and the apostles, and there's a larger crowd around, but he's specifically talking to his followers, and he says this. Now, Jesus told his disciples once upon a time, right? There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. There was a manager who was accused of wasting his possessions. In other words, there was this rich guy who had so much wealth and so much money that he couldn't manage it on his own. And he hired someone to spend his money in his name. I want that job. If any of y'all have that, let me know. Okay, I'll take that from you. But that's what this guy was doing. Now, the problem is this guy was wasting his possessions. He's like, okay, so he hears word that this guy's making under-the-table deals, or that he's using his possessions in an unfair way. And so the manager is about to get in trouble. The rich man is confronting this manager for ways using his money, and it continues like this. Jesus says, so he, the rich man, called him, the manager, in and asked him, hey, what's this I hear? What are you doing? What the word on the street is, you're not being very good to me. What's going on? What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. In other words, tidy things up and get the books together and let me know what's going on, and then you are out. So the rich man gives this person kind of a little window of time. He's got a small window of opportunity to get things together, to organize the books, and then to move in a different direction to go find another job. Now, the manager is kind of worrying because this means his job is gone. And it said, he even records this, Jesus says, the manager said to himself, what shall I do now? Now is the key word. He's going, oh no, I didn't think I was going to get caught. What's next? What am I supposed to do now? Now, this now is really important because the whole point of this message really hinges on the fact that this person, this manager, has been given a small window of opportunity, the small window of opportunity to make a difference and make a decision that might make his life better. So, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. And so, he says, I know what I'll do. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will, this is interesting, people will welcome me into their houses. I know what I'll do. He's got a plan to kind of cover himself into this next phase of life, whether that's retirement or whatever else. I know what I'll do so that I can make sure people will be welcoming me into the house. And again, this is a story Jesus is telling. This isn't something that happened. It's a parable. Now, interestingly enough, this next piece of words, it gets the weirdest. Because if you thought this was weird, just buckle up, because this next part is where it gets really weird. It continues like this. So, he called in each one of his master's debtors, everybody who owed money to his master, right? And so the implication of this story is that there's a lot of people who did business with this rich man, and that the manager was in charge of all the accounts, and there wasn't just like one or two, there were lots. And so he called in all these debtors, right, one at a time, and he asked the first, he brings them all in, and the implication is he did this with all of them. But the first one, he says, hey, how much do you owe my master? And the person replies, well, 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. This just seems like a crazy debt. Can we just I don't know what maybe this is like $1 million. I'm not really sure. But 900 gallons of olive oil seems like a lot to me. And so the manager told him, hey, quick, take out your bill and sit down quickly. In other words, and before my master gets here, sit down. I don't have a lot of time. Sit down, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to make it 450. Now, Jesus is the master storyteller because remember, there's a crowd, his disciples are there, but then there's this kind of larger crowd that's sitting behind him, right? And they're all listening and they're all leaning in like, oh my gosh, this seems kind of nefarious. This doesn't seem great, right? Take your bill, sit down quickly, make it 450. So this person's like, what a great deal. Sure, yeah, awesome. Let me do that for you real quick. And then immediately after, there's this idea that he goes, wow, thanks so much. If you ever need anything from me, let me know. And the manager was probably like, I will. You might get a phone call from me here real soon. And then there's another one. He goes on, he tells the story of a second. Hey, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. Again, that sounds kind of like a crazy thing, but the implication is it's a lot. And he told him, hey, quick, take out your bill and make it 800. And he said, wow, awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that for me. I'm so grateful. I can't believe that you've done this for me. All right, so Shauna, do a favor for me and skip together 2 slides. Would you do that? Because this next one wasn't supposed to be there. That's where we are. Sorry. So now here the guy's about to get caught because Jesus has told this story and everyone listening is kind of leaning in like, oh my gosh. And there's people who are on the debtor side going, wow, I can't imagine if someone would cut my debts in half. How great would that be? But then there's other people that are on the rich man's side going, this guy's a crook. No wonder he's getting fired. He needs to go right now. And so Jesus, the master storyteller, has everyone exactly where he wants them. And the first time I read this parable, I was expecting that when the master found out, what? This manager's going to get it, right? Because if I found out someone was wasting my money, if I found out someone was taking my stuff and wasting it and using it for whatever else or using it for their own gains, I'm going to be upset. But if you thought that, you would be wrong. And I was wrong the first time I read it. Now remember, Jesus, being the master storyteller, is not telling this story so that he can make sure people are stealing or being nefarious with their money. There's already plenty of laws and plenty of rules that show that's not good. And so what Jesus is teaching here is actually something else. If there's an implication of this, you have to understand how these parables work. In every parable, there's someone in the story that's representative of God, and there's somebody in the story that's representative of you and me and us as people. And so in this story, all the people sitting back are waiting for Jesus to just drop the hammer on this guy, but that's not what happens. Listen to this. The master commended, in other words, thanked the dishonest manager because, get this, he had acted shrewdly. Now, you might not use this word in your common day English, but shrewdly just means he thought it out. He carefully planned. He thought critically about what should and could happen. He thought critically about it. And in fact, the story kind of says, this master basically slaps his knee, laughs, and goes, hey, that was a good one. Way to go. When all the rest of us are going, huh? He stole from you. He messed up your business. Why would Jesus tell this story? I asked that when I was a kid. Maybe you didn't ask that when I did. I don't understand. Mommy, does this mean that Jesus said I can steal from people? No, that's not what that means. Well, then what does it mean? And if that's the question you're asking, that's the question the crowd was asking too. Because they're all going, what? I don't understand. Like, you lost me, Jesus. I'm super confused. I don't get it. And so Jesus has this entire crowd like on the edge of their seats. And then he steps out of the story and he gives them the point. And this is what he says. For the people of the world, right? The people of this world. Basically, the implication is the people who are not Jews at this point, but like largely, if we step out into our 21st century reading of this, he's talking about people who are Jesus followers, so like not Jesus followers. These are people who are not a part of this thing that God is up to in the world. They're not in the kingdom. They're on the outside. These people are more shrewd, right? They think more about what they do with each other and their own kind than are the people of the light. In other words, they're more shrewd in dealing with each other than we are, is what Jesus is saying. That people who are not, that they think this life is all there is, that this life is bookended by life and death. The people who think life that way, and that if God exists, maybe he doesn't really want much to do with me, that it's a birth certificate and a death certificate, and that's it. People who are in that thinking think more shrewdly and deal more shrewdly with each other than do the people of the light, the people who are Jewish, the people who in this case are Jesus followers. This is more than likely where you find yourself or are considering going. Now this is fascinating to me because if this is true, when I read this and finally figured this out, right? When I finally figured this out, there was something massive that clicked in my brain that I'd never thought about when it came to my money. And maybe you've never thought about this either. You see, the money manager was actually commended for taking full advantage of his limited time and opportunity. He wasn't commended for his nefarious behavior. He wasn't commended for stealing from his boss or making deals under the table. That's not what he got commended for. What he got commended for was taking full advantage of this little window of time that he had and the opportunity that he had. And then Jesus really drives this point home by saying the next thing, okay? So he gives an imperative, okay? And this is to everyone who is a Jesus follower. Look, if you're sitting in this room today and you're not a Jesus follower, you're not a Christian, I have no authority over you, and you have decided not to allow Jesus to have any authority over you. So this really, you don't have to obey this, but for those of us that consider ourselves connected and rooted into this mission of Jesus, this is a command that he gives. Listen to what he says. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now, don't ask me to explain what that means, because honestly, I don't know. But the implications couldn't be clearer. And honestly, I wouldn't give this a second thought, right? I wouldn't give this a second thought except for one thing. See, this whole statement is talking about things that happen beyond this life, right? That in other words, the implication is that something you can do with your temporary time and your temporary opportunity, your temporary fun, something you can do in this kind of temporary, bookended by birth certificate, death certificate time, can have eternal impact. That's kind of what this is saying. The implications couldn't be clearer. And I wouldn't give it a second thought except for one thing. The person who said it was crucified and then came back to life. And if somebody can predict their own death and their own resurrection and then pull it off, when they speak about eternity or death or life or resurrection, you should lean in and listen to what they have to say. And so Jesus making these implications about eternity and these implications about this kind of way that life could be impacted even beyond life now, you have to ask some different questions. You have to lean in, and that's exactly what his crowd was doing. See, in other words, Jesus is saying that money is a means. It's not the end. Money is a means. It's a pathway to something else. And when you look at it that way rather than the end, it actually frees you up from having to make some hard decisions. It frees you up from having to think about things in a way that maybe you don't really want to think about. Because it's not the end of your life. It's not the point of your life. It's not the thing you're supposed to be striving after. Now look, I know we all got kids and we got to pay bills and we got jobs and houses, and I'm not at all trying to convince you to make bad decisions or to think, not think critically about your income or whatever else. All I'm saying is that Jesus seems to think, and therefore I seem to think, That the point of money is not just to be the thing you pursue, that it's actually a means for something else. Well, then, what is it? That maybe this is the question you should be asking next. How can I leverage more of what I have as a means to an end that it's not me? How can I leverage more of what I have to be to a means that's not me? In other words, how can I make it not about me? If that's the case, right? Because again, like I said earlier, if you make money the end of your life, if you make it the one pursuit in your life, you're going to end up probably alone and probably not living anywhere you want to be, because you're going to climb to the top of that ladder and not like what you find when you get there. And some of you want to try that test. I've said that before. We say money can't buy happiness, and we're like, well, I'll be I'll be your huckleberry. Give me a chance. I would love to test that theory for you. Maybe that's what you're feeling, but Jesus makes it very clear that's not actually the case. And so I got to lean into something that happened in my personal life. And I didn't tell my wife I was going to tell these stories, so she's sitting over here, and so you might disagree with me later. You guys can poll her, okay? But when she and I got married, neither one of us really had a really great head on our shoulders about money. She probably better than me. I just wanted to make lots of it and spend it as quickly as humanly possible, or give it away. I grew up with very generous parents, and my mom would give away. My dad would give it away. I saw him actually take a shirt off of his back and give it to someone who didn't have it once. That's a big deal, okay? That's kind of the environment that I grew up in. So I've always looked at money like, let's just give it all away, and as long as I can buy my fun things, that's all I really care about. She grew up with a much more level-headed, head on her shoulders about making a budget and making sure we could handle our things. And so as we got together and we got married and we start stitching our lives together, we had some very difficult decisions to make, because in the process of us getting engaged and married, I went from having a career in engineering to being a pastor. And I gave up my, $45,000, $50,000 a year entry-level job to go make $8,000 a year as the pastor at Campbellsburg United Methodist Church. It was a massive financial swing. But both of us had committed to be generous. We had both committed, we don't know what this looks like, but we feel like as Jesus followers, we're supposed to be generous. And so, we're gonna give a percentage of our income. We're gonna start there. We're gonna get our calculators out, and it wasn't much because we weren't making much. We were gonna give it away. But then we also decided, okay, we can't give as much money as we really wish we could, but we've got all this stuff. We've got all these things. And we turned stuff into stories. There were multiple times, I actually took a second job in this season of time. There were multiple times I'd come home, and my wife, there would be somebody in our kitchen shopping in our cabinets. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? And it was somebody who needed food, and she's like, well, just come in and take out of our fridge, or just come and take out of our there are stories, seriously, I'm getting emotional thinking about this. There are stories of things that happened in that season of time for us early on, and still to this day, that I get emotional thinking about, because those moments impacted somebody else in a way that I never would have thought possible. We decided to just take our stuff and turned it into stories. That the stuff was great, and it was easy because we didn't have a lot of it, but rather than making it the pursuit of our lives, we just said, well, you know what, whatever we can do with it, if somebody can use it, if we can help someone in some way, then let's just, whatever it is, we'll give it away, and God will take care of the rest. We'll just figure out what happens, People have shopped in our house before. We're the kind of people that go out of the way. If we're going to err, and probably there's an error in this, we err towards saying yes to people when they ask us for help, and sometimes that gets us in messes and trouble. But if we're going to err anywhere, we've decided to err towards that, because what we realized is our stuff was really not the end; it was the means to an end. And God had given us what we had. And so, when I talk to young couples, if some of you, I'm doing your weddings this summer, and so you either haven't heard this yet or you have heard this yet. I'm not sure where you are in the process, but I tell young couples when we talk about money is that, look, you need to decide, okay, this is brilliant, this is why you pay me, okay? You need to decide what percentage of income you want to live on. You know why? Because you're going to live on a percentage of your income. And so you should make that decision rather than allowing your lifestyle to make that decision, right? I mean, seriously, I don't even know you, but I know you are living on a percentage of your income in some way. Wouldn't you rather have been the one that made that decision rather than letting culture or lifestyle make that decision for you? In other words, you have to ask this question, and every person, regardless of where you are, you have to ask this question: do I want more stuff, or do I want more stories? Do I want more stuff, or do I want more stories? At the end of things, when people are telling your story, they're not going to talk about how much you had, they're going to talk about who you were. And this is not this is not you should give all your money to the church and start making crazy decisions with all your stuff. That's not what I'm saying. I just think that if you find yourself in a pursuit of stuff, it's not going to lead you where you want to go. And so simply, do you want more stuff, or do you want more stories? Now, Jesus isn't done. I'm going to kind of fly through the end of this really fast because he gets down really into the brass tacks really quick, and it's good and it's obvious what he's saying. So listen to what he says next. Whoever, and that just means whoever, anybody, can be trusted. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little, well, they'll be dishonest with much. And you might be reading that going, well, I don't understand. I don't have a lot, and they do, and they have more than me, or I don't have enough, and no, you're losing me. I don't understand. Jesus, but the implications are obvious. If you can be trusted with a little bit, you can be trusted with a lot. And then he really drives it home, and he says, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, and you go, wait a minute, worldly wealth, what do you mean? Is there another wealth? Aha, right? Hold on to that thought. If you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? So in other words, what Jesus is saying ultimately, and if you're looking at this through God's kingdom lens, okay, you're looking at the way God looks at the way this world works, money's a test. Money's a test. If you can be trusted with a little, then you can be trusted with a lot. And if you can't be trusted with a little, then you can't be trusted with a lot. And, he says, and if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, this is kind of confusing. Jesus, this is my deed, it's my truck, it's my paycheck, it's all my things. Wait a minute, I don't understand. If you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Jesus is making this really interesting case that what we have is not ours. And so when we look at it that way, it's actually really freeing to think about. Now, this does not mean you should give 100% of your income away, because we all got stuff. But it also means you shouldn't worry about it. And it also means you shouldn't be concerned about it. It also means that these are things that God has given and provided to you, and he's wanting to see how faithful you're going to be and what kingdom you belong to. This whole comparison that Jesus did in this story is beautiful because it compares this worldly kingdom and this worldly worldview to his kingdom and his worldview, and he just wants to say, hey, look, here's the two views. And if you could take your money out of your pocket and it could talk to you, it would say a handful of things. One of which it would say is this: I'll still be here when you're gone. You've been hearing it forever. Unfortunately, it's kind of morbid to think about, but you can't take it with you when you go. My dad was a funeral director as a kid, so I saw this all the time. Okay, it was funny the stuff people would lob into caskets, to bury in the ground, and they're not taking it; it's still there in the ground, right? My money, I'll be here when you're gone. And this one's big: the moment you think you own me, the moment you think that you own me and you're in charge of me, I own you. And I have lived into this in my own life, and it is not fun. And some of you are stuck here in this place right now, and it is not fun because then you feel strapped, like you have to take that loan to get that thing because everyone else has one, or the stuff becomes the priority, and you have to work harder, you have to take more to be able to get to where you need to be, and you find yourself sacrificing your values or sacrificing your priorities to get this thing, and then you get the thing, and it leads to wanting another thing. Now, the point Jesus is making is simply this: we are managers, not owners. So that means, some of us struggle with what percentage of our income to give away. What God is actually saying is 100% of what you have came from him in the first place. And I'm not lobbying for you to give 100% away. And in fact, I'm not even telling you what percentage of your income to give away. I'm just simply saying that you have to make a choice of what that looks like. And when you do, it is actually freeing, not bogging you down. It is setting you free. It is giving you freedom. It's going, you know what, you're not in charge of me, money. You're not in charge of me, paycheck. You're not in charge of me, drive for more stuff. You're not in charge. You're not involved. So this is it, and I'm done. Okay, one more question. This is the one that I want to leave you with, right? This is the question you have to ask yourself. If you're gonna take all this, okay, Jesus, I hear you, and you're talking about stuff, and I want to put my money in the right place, and I want to think about my life maybe in a new way. Here's the question you should ask: If being a means to an end is what gives your life meaning. If in other words, having a direction and not having the end, but having a meaning to an end, if being a means to an end is what gives your life meaning, to what ends do you want your life to be a means? And there's probably more than one, okay? Ends is plural there on purpose. Where do you actually want your life to go? What do you want your life to look like? And when you're able to kind of separate and step back from paycheck and almighty dollar being the thing that is the driving force and realize it's just a tool, it's just a means rather than the thing, oh my gosh, it's freeing. And look, listen, if you don't make this decision, unfortunately the culture will make it for you. Think about this. If you don't make this decision, here's the things that are going to be driving you, okay? It's going to be accumulation, it's going to be consumption and upgrades and fashion forward and house full of stuff. This is what your life will amount to if you don't make this decision for you. You know this. This is not a Christian thing. This is just a thing. And look, listen to me. If you don't make the choice, this is where your life will lead, and nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. Like, you don't want to get to the end and somebody's fighting for stories to tell about you at the end because this is kind of what your pursuit was. And no one would choose this on their own. But when we go into autopilot about our finances, this is where we end up because this is where the culture is driving. I'm just being honest. Again, it's not a Christian thing. It's just a thing. And if you don't want this, then maybe possibly you can make some different choices. Because here's the thing. If you live for yourself, you'll only have yourself to show for yourself, along with some stuff for people to fight over when you're gone. If you live for yourself, you only have yourself to show for it, along with some stuff for people to fight over when you're gone. And unfortunately, sooner or later, all of us will be gone. So the question, this is it. If being a means to an end is what gives your life meaning, to what ends do you want your life to be a means? Now, Jesus finishes his whole teaching thing by saying that Luke records one more thing. It's really interesting. Jesus kind of like closes the book on this teaching, and then Luke steps out of the crowd. I told you there was kind of a crowd of people around, and Jesus was talking to his disciples, but there was another group of people that were kind of listening in. And so Luke records this really interesting verse in verse 14. Now the Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. And do you know what their names were? Yeah, I don't either. So let's get this right. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you so much for these people gathered here today. And God, I want to thank you for this teaching that Jesus did. It's hard. And to think about stepping out of our finances and looking at them differently and maybe asking some harder questions about what you would have us do, or maybe some freeing questions to realize this isn't the point, right? God, help us to sort that out this week. Maybe we need to have conversations about debt. Maybe we need to have conversations about pursuits or careers or whatever else. God, there's freedom that can be found in orienting our lives in your direction. So as we are sorting this out, would you translate what I've been trying to say into what they need to hear to be able to hear what you would have them do next? God, we love you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all so much for coming to TCAT this week. God bless you. We will be back next week with part 3. Okay, invite somebody. I'll see you then.